In this episode, I had the pleasure and honor of sitting with two of my friends who have been moderators and, more importantly, players in my personal homebrew Dungeons and Dragons game. In this episode, we discussed how they got into TTRPGs such as Dungeons and Dragons, what their experience has been, and what recommendations they have for new players. So, if you are a new player or want to play your first game of Dungeons and Dragons, this episode is exactly for you. So, without further ado, let's get started.
All right. So we have been kind of mulling over some ideas and thoughts for this episode, and it's been kind of funny because we have gone through kind of the ringer of topics. However, I feel the most important thing to talk about is probably the origin story of how we got into D&D. And especially with the new year, a lot of people are going to go play D&D or some sort of tabletop RPG, right? And when I mean a lot of people, probably like, a few 100,000 people throughout the world may
Mhm.
play. And I'm going to be very conservative in that nature and in that number. So when we thought about this when writing the episode and thinking about it, really, I think this kind of naturally came about. So for the folks out there, my guest tonight is a dear friend, also one of the moderators on our server, which is the Bearded Nerd uh, Network. You can find us on Discord, and an all around great guy and one of the players in my game. And he's been a huge supporter and follower of the Bearded Nerd for a very long time. And I don't know if you want me to call you by your first name, your legal name, or your character name, my friend. What should I call you by? Dun dun dun. No, I'm kidding.
Uh,
Kyle, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, man.
Well, I
Great to be
appreciate it,
here.
dude. I appreciate it. And shortly, our other moderator friend and all around fooligan, James, who's another moderator on the show, will join us soon, which is great because we are going to talk about when we first started playing tabletop RPGs, how we got introduced to it, and more importantly, what are some of the tips and advices, some of the things to stay away from now that we know how to play and what we've gotten ourselves into. So, all the little ins and outs. Basically, this is going to be your comprehensive guide to starting in the tabletop RPG. So, without further ado, Kyle, if you don't mind, share with us how you got started in tabletop RPGs.
Oh boy. Well, um, let's see. R- I started playing back when fifth edition came around, like
So 2014 ish,
roughly in
ish.
there, like right at the beginning of it.
Okay.
Uh, like most people, watched, Critical Role. That was like a big one that kind
Mhm.
of like piqued my interest. Wasn't what got me into it, though.
Which, for the folks who are not familiar with Critical Role is a live play game of Dungeons and Dragons where, to quote their intro, a bunch of nerdy voice actors get together, sit around, and play games like Dungeons and Dragons. So they are highly trained, very entertaining group, and you can Google them. They're very successful. Sorry,
Oh,
continue.
no, it's cool. They weren't the ones that got me into it. There was this other group that uh I watched. Can't think of their name. It'll come to me later.
Dimension
But
20.
no, it was
Okay.
this like kind of like like upstarty one. I can't think of the name. I was looking for it earlier and I just couldn't think of it. But it was basically
they started playing fourth edition. And then when fifth edition came out, they switched over.
Were
They
they a
they only made
comedy
like
group?
no.
Okay.
I can't. It's gonna drive me nuts because I'm gonna think of it later.
Yeah, because I remember Acquisitions Incorporated started with 24 with fourth edition and then transitioned. That's why I asked. They were so good.
Yeah, it's gonna bug me now. But it was basically a group of people who've never played D&D before. Like they literally made characters for the first time on camera.
Mm,
They went through the whole character customization together and they were playing. And honestly, I thought that was great for someone who never played before,
yeah.
in my opinion, because that way, you know, I'm kind of following along, learning about, the game itself, which I thought was great. And then I was doing that for about 2 years, just watching, reading books, like doing all the trying to understand the game, like rule wise.
Hmm.
And then I made a friend at my job at the time who had a group, and he invited me, and we started playing Curse of Strahd.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and
That's a very interest.
that's a that's a very interesting way to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, bro. Like, it is a really good module. For the folks out there who are not familiar with it, it's a fantastic module. It really is.
And then I basically was playing with them for like almost like 2, 3 years, and then like COVID happened.
That little thing.
Yeah, and then uh I basically met you over Instagram,
Yep.
and then I joined Discord. We hung out, we talked, you invited me into your game, and then here we are, sir.
Yeah, it's been a pretty interesting journey, especially with the amount of like twists and turns and things of that nature with, having my first daughter or my firstborn and then my secondborn, my son, and like just going through the ups and downs of it. And for the folks out there who are parents and still get to play, that's awesome. Like keep playing, bring your kids involved, take your kids, do what you got to do. But I started playing. So let me go back. I would ironically sit down in my room and like read a lot of books, and this is kind of where I started as a game master and a storyteller slash world builder. It all kind of like happened all at once. And I would sit in my room with my brother and we would talk about how like the comic books that we read, and let's say like let's pick Marvel. There was a really great line. I think actually it's called Mutant X. It was a fantastic comic book series. It was about, you know, Alex Summers getting transported into like a multiverse before the multiverse became popular. So like Magneto led the X-Men and he was good. Charles Xavier was bad. Like it just like flipped the narrative. So we would talk about the what if situations and scenarios. What if we did this? What if we did that? So that's where the world building started. And then I started writing about my world and about like different things in the world and how things would be. Put a stop to it, then picked it back up, put a stop, like because like anime or manga or comics or movies would inspire me. So it's like I took a break to kind of like soak it in. Then in college, and mind you, I did play, you know, Dark Tower. I played other RPGs and whatnot. We were pretty broke, so we played what we had. We may have borrowed books, we may have borrowed, I don't know, whatever, but we played with what we had. Then in college, I really got into it with my friends Sam and Jake and Dave. We all played in our college suite in our dorms. And Jake, who was the game master, ran, uh, I think he ran 3.5, maybe. Maybe it was fourth edition. I don't remember. Um, but I remember the game that I remember he had Reaper minis, like the Reaper Bones minis.
Yeah,
And
I
I was
I
like,
I have tons of those.
yeah, me too. I love them. I absolutely love them. And it was cool. I don't really remember the sessions, but it was good. It was cool. Then I took a break from it because I moved back home from college and I had no community. I was lonely AF. And ironically, around my birthday, so it's 2025 to right now, 2012 ish time, like the fall of 2012 leading into 2013. So yeah, 2013, excuse me. I found a place called Your Local Game Store. And it was at the time in Matthews, North Carolina. And I found it. It was on my birthday. Actually, you know, it'll be actually this Friday will be uh I'm like 13 years or something like that, 12, 13 years or more that I've been actively playing Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and like I mean, I'm talking like either on a weekly basis or like a bi-weekly. Like just I committed. I went full nerd. Um and Timothy, the owner, was like, "Hey, do you want to play a game called Magic the Gathering?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. I would love to learn how to play Magic the Gathering." And when I learned how to play Magic the Gathering, while I was playing that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, because they were closed on Sunday, I would say, "Hey, what's this? Oh, you guys have Dungeons and Dragons? Cool. Let me play Adventures League." Because it was weekly, it was a committed thing. Or let me play Pathfinder Society. That was the bigger one that took note. I played a lot of Pathfinder Society. And of course, like I created, a character and did all that stuff. I always had a character though, um, before I even touched an RPG. And that was Dane of the Misty Mountains because I loved Lord of the Rings. So even when we were playing Dark Tower, when we were playing some, I remember friends of ours would have like second edition, right? And we would tell stories because we really didn't roll dice. We just told stories. And now Dane of the Misty Mountains. And like if we needed to make a decision, sure, you could flip a coin. And I will get to that controversial point with needing not needing dice. But the point is, I started really playing around 2012, 2013. I mean, fully committed. And I was pretty much playing every week Pathfinder Society, a little bit of Adventures League, and then found a group of guys um, that, quite honestly, like we played for a year. And it was awkward, I'll tell you that, because I saw them prepping in their session zero. And I was like, "Oh, are you guys playing?" I'm actually looking for a group. I was about to post this note card. I literally had an index card and I was going to post it on the board. And I found them. I kind of butted in. And for a year we played. We saw they were like, "Oh, we're going to play fifth edition." And I was like, "Okay." And I saw Unearthed Arcana. And they were like, "Oh, let's use some cool stuff from Unearthed Arcana in this homebrew world." And that's what I I played a barbarian Path of the Zealot, Storm Herald specifically.
Mm.
And it was Balasar, the Dragonborn barbarian. Um, and then later on, I brought Dane Battlehammer back into the world. And then I think from there, I got married. We kept playing Homebrew. Then we kept playing Curse of Strahd. And then I was, I was like, man, I'm tired of just like, I love playing, but I'm tired of having to stop and start a campaign because
Yeah.
scheduling. And I said, you know what? I've GM'd before, I've told stories, I've GM'd, I've done all that, I've done whatever, right? But very, very seldom. And then I said, you know what? It's 2016, 2017. I'm going to fully commit. Like, and that's where I truly take the time. Like, I fully committed. Therefore, I fully started playing at that time. I started GMing for a group of coworkers. Um, and I remember I walked them through session zero. We actually played at your local game store. I still have the pictures. Um, we had a really good combat encounter. It was a solid like 4 or 5 hours. Mind you, I didn't have kids back then, so I was like never tired. And yeah, we played. That's the group that we played 20 hours a week. Like we would, because we worked together, so we would play 4 or 5 hour. We would play 4 hours a day because we would break it apart. Like we'd play a little bit during lunch, and then we would do all our little political intrigue and all our little stuff in between work during breaks. And then, for our normal game, we would go eat something or make food, and then we would go eat, and it was great. And yeah, it's been like that forever since, man.
Yeah, I I I haven't talked to really anyone from my old group, but I do like keep tabs, like see what people are doing, seeing what they're up to.
Oh yeah, I still and I'll
Yeah,
talk about this probably later. Like I still talk to them. I still talk to some of our old group where you and I played. Like I still talk to some of them too.
yeah.
Um, but life is just a funny thing. And now,
Mhm.
for those folks listening, our second, third co-host, whatever you want to call, I don't know the grammar and the syntax, but James, who I've known for over 15 years, yeah, has joined, and I'll introduce him really quick because ironically, he was the RA that moved me into college, and we just became instant friends. Um, and quasi lovers because, well, not quasi, our pesky wives get in the way. But more importantly, um, I've known James for a very long time, and we enjoy certain sports, we enjoy a lot of the same things. But nerddom was a really big component. Storytelling, how to tell a story, how to build a world. So we would always talk about it. And ironically, I taught James how to play Magic, but then, in to quote our beloved IP, now he has become the master and I the student. So recently, though, he has played in his first TTRPG. So James, welcome to the show, my friend. I hope that you're doing well, but tell us a little bit about your experience like, how did you hear about D&D or just tabletop RPGs? And then what made you want to play? And what was your emotion or feeling or thoughts after you played?
Okay, so a little bit about the background. Obviously, like Brian just graciously introduced, my first being introduction to other forms of nerddom besides the ones that I grew up with was him throwing me into Magic, and then really, I think it was during college when we were in school together with some of the other guys that we were around. that was the first time I'd ever heard of D&D. And so you're talking, sometime in the last 14, 15 years is when I heard about it. And then I kind of tabled it. Didn't look at it, didn't really look into it at all until the last, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years post the COVID era.
Mhm.
In talking to you, like obviously Magic had, everybody had their stuff with COVID, but Magic was one of the last games to come back online in terms of being in person play, like fully gripped with the COVID times.
Yep.
And so that's when I started talking to you more about like D&D and looking at other games. And yeah, so that kind of just started piquing my interest. And then really over the last couple of years, I sat in more, listened to Brian lead some different sessions, see how he was doing it, got to see how the players interacted, and kind of got my feet wet in that end. So with that, I very much got to proverbially dip my toe in and see if this would even be something that I'd be interested in doing. And as Brian mentioned, like we'd always enjoyed the epic storytelling that comes in a lot of nerd fantasies or nerd stories. And so there was always an openness to it, I guess, but there wasn't necessarily an openness to playing. Um, and some of it is fine. I mean, as Brian mentioned, like when you have kids, you got a lot less time on your hands.
True.
I'm very blessed. I have three beautiful little children. They're all sub 7 years old. I work full time. My wife works full time. So not a lot of time on my hands, so to
Yeah,
speak.
for sure.
So I mean, I was very hesitant, and so that I would say was like the first emotion I had prior to playing was hesitancy. It was that
Mhm.
almost not. I don't want to say fear, but there was just that like I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I want to do this. And I guess there was a little bit of doubt there, and yeah, so that's kind of like the introduction to it. Um, what was your second question, Brian? I remember your third was the post.
Well, what was like so, and mind you, because you and I went to the same college, like um like you and I also we know you and I both knew Sam
Yep.
and Dave and Jake. We were all part
Yes.
of the same household and like, fraternal order. So like you remembered when we used to play, like when they would play, and like I would play, but James and I were history majors in college, and of course hindsight is 2020. So I think I made the right decision, but I decided to submit my thesis in the fall so that it was out the way and done. And it was just, I could enjoy like that last semester. And I also worked during the summer. So like I never, like the year, my junior year, I, if I could play with them, I would play. Or if I had the time, I would play, but it was just not like a thing until later on. So like I mention all that because part of the question is, you know, you came in, I would safely assume, or rather, I'd safely say that, and make an assumption that, yeah, you played because of me. And
Yeah.
I kind of forced you to, I
I,
prodded
oh,
you to do it.
yeah,
And
I was gonna say I wouldn't say you forced me. You definitely gave me the proper nudge to be like, hey, this is something. You look at the tropes and the IPs that I love. I love Lord of the Rings. I love
Mhm.
Star Wars. I love as a younger child, I really enjoyed Harry Potter. So I love these immersive world building stories that told massive epics. And so like you played off of that, and then you played off of course, like knowing like the Magic player history and stuff. Like, okay, well, Magic has traits that pull from D&D. And so you kind of prodded me in those ways. And you definitely didn't force me. Like there was no, you're going to do this. Like you weren't threatening me kind of thing, which is good because I
Man, no,
think
I'm
that made
kidding.
it more comfortable for me to take my time and be like, okay, hey, I want to sit on this. I want to
True.
see what this is like and like how this operates because it is a different sphere for me. And so, which is crazy to think of like, okay, I love talking. I love hanging out with people. I love sharing stories. This would be the natural progression, but there was that like, again, like that pre-mentioned self-doubt of like, well, could I do it in this fashion? And so you kind of prodded me properly and healthily in that way to say, hey, this is a way you could really have some fun. And you might actually find a good community. And I think we have off the first session. And leading into, I think, your third question, like off the first session, it was a lot of fun. That's like the first thing that I think of, like, well, I had fun because there's all these different personalities meshing, and there's a lot of the individual personalities coming out through the character. And I think that's something that, in my mind, makes role playing actually really beautiful. Is you get to put yourself and be immersive while also still removing yourself from the world at the same time. So,
True.
like, you get to remove yourself from the real world and immerse yourself in that fantasy world.
Yep.
And that can just be fun because it can be very enjoyable to not feel the weight of the world on your shoulders in those moments and just kind of pull off your own history and your own background and your own personality and throw that into your character. So that'd be my first thought, was like, it was fun, and it truly was. And I look forward to the next session. Secondarily, like, I don't know if it's because, again, it's not like there wasn't necessarily an emotional aspect to it. It was the thought process. Like, now I'm intrigued. Like, you've given me the bait. You've been out here sitting on the boat, Brian, for a few weeks, and in this case, a few years, slowly reeling your line in. And I finally bit the hook, line, and sinker, and now I'm in. And so now there's this intrigue, though, of like, well, how do we go? And I think in our case, in the case of this game as well, I think there's going to be a lot of fun because you have history playing with Kyle. You have history with one of our other players in terms of running a game that they play in. And you have a lot of personal history with me. And so those things are going to factor in to some extent with how you manage the game for us as our GM or DM or whatever the term is we want to use on that, for proper acronyms. But it's also going to allow you to be more comfortable with the expression that comes out from the players.
Yeah.
So that makes me intrigued. I'm very intrigued to see where this goes. And yeah, it's going to be very there's a level of childlike excitement because of that.
Hell yeah.
And so yeah, that's really where I feel coming off of, week one. I've got stuff running through my head. I mean, and Brian knows this. To kind of expand upon that thought quickly, and then I'll let you guys keep ripping. Is Brian knows this very well with me with hobbies. Is there's not really a hobby that I get into that I don't try to fully immerse myself into before making a determination of if I like it or not.
True. Very
And
true.
so, like, we can look at Magic. I played Magic for over a decade, and you know went from collecting to playing to. I mean, I didn't miss.
Oh, dude, you collected like crazy.
Well, I collected like crazy. I mean, you're talking. I mean, but yeah, I collected like crazy. I had more cards than I knew what to do with. I mean, you're talking 30,000 plus bulk cards from just collecting and winning in tournaments, and mostly locals, but like trying out the competitive scene. And of course, like, as I was really getting into that, we had the unfortunate reality that COVID hit, and that killed the competitive scene for 2 years.
It
I
did.
mean, and that was kind of the beginning of the end for me for Magic, because then when it comes back, it's not as big in paper play. There's certain formats that Wizards have handled pretty poorly. And so I was like, okay, well, I did my immersion, and now the game's going in a direction for play style that doesn't really fit how I want to play and how I want to interact with the game. And so let me look at other things. And, so I have, other couple other hobbies. One's tabletop with Legion, and then the other is, another card game with Star Wars Unlimited. So very fitting, pulling off the two IPs
Mm-hmm.
to look at and kind of dig into that. And I'm slowly doing the Legion immersion right now. I'm in that like toe dip. Oh, the pool water feels okay.
Yeah.
2 inches below the surface. Star Wars Unlimited, I've thrown myself wholeheartedly into. I joined that game 1 month after it released fully in paper, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah.
And with D&D, I think it's kind of that same thing where I took my time, and now it's like, hey, I'm going to immerse myself in it, and I'm going to actually give it a proper chance. And that's when I bring up the immersion, is like, if you don't immerse yourself in a hobby at least once, you don't know if you actually like it.
Yeah.
Because you didn't take the time to figure out if you could do it and enjoy it. And that was my point with that, of like, that's the other feeling of like, I'm going to give this shot because of those reasons.
So, Kyle, from your perspective, like, as you've started to play and learn the rule set, things like that. Well, first off, is D&D the only RPG that you currently play, or do you play other RPGs before I ask that other question?
D&D has been the only game I've played tabletop wise,
Okay.
other than like the few card games I've played. Like
Sure, sure, sure.
I played Magic a little. I still find Magic very intriguing
Yeah.
as like a game, like from the lore and the
Oh, the lore is amazing. It's some
standpoint.
of the
Yeah.
best lore. I mean, 30 years of lore has been built up and a 30-year story has gone on. And that, because I love world building and storytelling, I think Magic really pulled me. What pulled me out of Magic the first time was the fact that I could not keep up with standards cost. It was just too much. And then the second time it pulled me back in with the Adventures in Forgotten Realms set. And of course, like James, like really, we'd talk about deck techs and we would talk about all that. But Adventures in Forgotten Realms brought me back in, and I was my goal, and I have to finish collecting like the master set, but
Mhm.
I pretty much like did that and then got back into it. I played uh Gruul. It was the Draconic Rage from Adventures in Forgotten Realms, that commander deck. That because I was worried. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to spend all this money again. And basically James was like, "No, man, there's Commander. Did you remember that format?" And I was like, "Nope, not at all." Um, and we play. I played Commander, and then pretty much that was it. I would play Commander nights because it was either I think at the time, and James, correct me if I'm wrong, my daughter was born and she was like a baby. So like I
Correct.
could go to the local game store and at 7 o'clock and play Commander from 7 to 8. And what else? Then there was, and that's this, and Commander. It was like a
Yeah.
very just relaxed format. And then I upgraded. I did all that stuff. It was cool. It
Yes.
was great. But like the thing that got me out of it again was just like rotation and all this other stuff. The lore never got me out. It's not like I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this sucks." No, the lore and storytelling of Magic is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So with that being said, Kyle, so you've played D&D strictly, like you've just been
Mhm.
strictly okay. So from your perspective, what is some of the things that you feel like you've learned from D&D, and then what are some of the like, aspects of D&D that when you like, let's say, like you learned, of course, how to create a character, but what are some of the things that like you wish you would have known before you started playing?
Oh, wow.
So you can break the question apart first. Like if you want to just answer the first part, you're more than welcome to.
Well, what I learned was very much like teamwork. Like I learned a lot more like teamwork skills from playing because prior to that, like I've always been on like a team, like whether it be at work or in school and whatnot. I always felt like I'm always doing the work. You know, I'm always the one that's trying to get the work done
Yeah, so in the
and
group
not
projects,
and
you're the one that's doing the work.
yeah, and everyone else is like messing around. So,
Fools.
yep, fools. Um, so it was nice playing a game where everyone had their role and they stuck to it.
Yeah.
Um, and then my takeaway from the game, I guess, would be don't be afraid to like basically be yourself, like in terms of like your character, like and also as like yourself,
As a
like
person.
yeah, as a person.
Bring your whole self.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that. When you mean being your character and being yourself. Break that down a little bit. What do you think people, when especially like a new player, right? So from like James's perspective, if you could give James a piece of advice of being your character, take us through that. What do you mean?
Just don't don't be afraid to, at least in my case, which sometimes isn't a great point, but don't be afraid to push certain boundaries with your character.
Okay.
Don't, like, be try and embody your character the best of your ability, but do it in a manner that's not, gonna get you kicked from the group.
I
Be
get that.
be your character, but try not to be your character, if that makes sense.
So basically, what I'm interpreting, because and again, I know what you're referencing,
Yeah.
and for the audience out there, like basically, it was a discussion we've had in the past where we have seen and noticed, like, okay, there's a limit to how one could say, oh, you're like your character, and then you become your character, and we sometimes and kind of to give you a bit of a background, James, we often create characters that resemble ourselves. Like James, I can already tell you, like the character you've created for yourself, like that is a version of you that, and I know you realize it because you're
Oh
smart,
yeah,
like, and you put
it's
yourself
intentional.
into it. Yes, it's 100% intentional. And this is the thing, like, for example, Dane is, he's Dane Battlehammer in like my homebrew world. He's Dane, well, technically King Dane Granite Heart in uh, another game that I play in that I've been playing in since 2018, 2019 now. And like I'm about to hit level 20. So like it's been a long process and it's been great. And I've put a lot of myself in that character. Like I will reference it as a player because I feel like as a GM, I'm kind of cheating. But as a player playing in this world of Evermore with some other like content creators and stuff, or OG content creators, I should say, not a lot of the new breed of like TikTok content creators. I'm talking about like old school Patreon, old school like Instagram content creators that if, when like, you know, if you were to see them, you'd be like, oh yeah, I remember them. Um, I play with a lot of them, and it. I've just played this character, and I've realized, like, oh my gosh, like they're the notions of this character are just me, right? Like so Dane at one point in game was having a kid, and it came around the time where I was having my daughter, and the fears and worries and anxieties as a new dad like came out. And Ray, an awesome guy, I love him to death. He's a great game master, and he knew how to like hold my hand through it, right? Like he knew how to do certain things during the different phases of Dane. And I realized, like, oh my gosh, like that was me. Like I figured out that, like, oh my God, I never thought that I was anxious about being a dad because, James, Kyle, you both know me well enough that even if I am, I keep a very good wall to like get through it, just to get through the mission objective, to just go through, do what I got to do. And I think that's kind of like how I was raised unintentionally. So my character, I put a lot of myself in that character without knowing. So what I'm interpreting, Kyle, is like to not be afraid to do that because I think sometimes we're told, "Oh, be careful," right? Like my one of my cousins or my wife's cousins rather, um, his name's Gayton. He's in the seminary, so him and his fellow seminarians play D&D, which is really funny because everyone is
because
so
of the
like
because of the
so
notion.
the satanic
Yeah,
panic like screwed it
I
up
know.
for like everyone, and it was literally 1% of like the denomination that was like, you're going to hell. And like literally later on, the misinformation spread so bad that like it just was horrible.
It
But
just turned to wildfire.
yeah, and but Gayton and his seminarian friends play, and like he brought up a good point. You can be your character, but never cross the boundary of like, because you are yourself. You're just putting aspects of yourself in this character, and that's why it's so cool, because you get to tell different stories as a different part of you, and in a safe manner.
Yeah. So my question for you, Brian, is: do you see your D&D character in the mirror every time you look in
I mean, with the beard, yeah, bro.
it?
Mountain dwarf, baby. Just saying. But like James, like here's that the same question. Like, well, I don't know about the same question about you looking at yourself in the mirror and stuff like that. But
I don't have a
actually,
luscious beard, so no. I mean, I don't see the
yeah,
mountain dwarf.
in your
I
heart
wish,
of
I
hearts, you
wish.
are.
In yeah, deep in my soul, that is what I am. I'm just a tall dwarf, but
we
yeah,
let's be real here. We all are. That's in some form or facet. We're all mountain dwarfs
That's right.
at
That's
but
heart.
right.
better a dwarf than a goblin.
Yeah,
That's
that's
true.
very true.
Like my children,
Oh,
unfortunately.
those are gremlins. Those are
That's
gremlins. That's a
true.
completely different breed.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, you're not lying. But yeah, man, like so like James, like and again, like from your perspective, fresh into the hobby, like when you created your character, what was your process? Like not necessarily the mechanics of like, oh, I'm going to choose this class, but what was your process like when you created this character?
I mean, for me personally, the way that I looked at this specific character, I think it was influenced by the class, but it was like, hey, I already have this class in mind, and then I'm going to take this notion of how I would see that class and pour in, like you said, that certain aspect of myself, which, like in my case, was a past influence of myself. It was a part of a past reality.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so it's where, like, the thought process that I just had as we were discussing this is I look at D&D right now as a new player and say, like, well, this is how you can play, your multiversal character concepts where you can have these aspects where you can, again, keeping within certain lines, like, hey, that's the character in the game and I'm me, and that's fine. But being able to pull pieces of myself and kind of put them in. And so, yeah, for a lot of it, like, there's a lot of inspirations from my character with, it's his backstory to his upbringing to some of the things that the rest of the group's going to find out as we go through of how he acts and his motivations for acting in such fashions that are going to be very much at the very least inspired by what I grew up with, and it's going
Yeah.
to be um, kind of cool to kind of reminisce, but in a much more fun way. Um, I mean, yes, there'll still be some of those things that come out where it's like, oh wow, like I did that, like, and it's like, whoa, like, okay, well, that's why my character can do this because like I've lived it. Like I don't have any problem saying like, yeah, this guy's going to do this because it's something that I experienced. And but also keeping in mind like, okay, this gets to be almost more so like where would I go in this fantasy, and how would that play out if I didn't end up on the pathway that I was on, and
Yeah.
or is there a different pathway I want to take? Is it going to follow, and that's what we don't know. And that's the parts that like I don't see yet is necessarily the direction of where the character will go. That's going to be very dependent on the interactions with the other players. And Brian, where you lead us as the GM, that's really been my mindset as a new player is like find a little bit of yourself, even if it's one from, and latch onto that piece and then let it explode. Because I think that's a way that you can be artistically inclined to flesh out this whole nother side or thought process and make yourself more comfortable with playing with a role play and playing another character.
I think that is probably the best approach from a new player perspective. And from what I'm interpreting is like you're creating your character, you're going through like the notions, you're asking yourself questions, and you're open to whatever the story, wherever the story leads you. Because obviously, like you're going to go one direction, you're going to want to go in a particular manner or way, but a good GM is going to dangle that and another option
Yeah.
for you to choose. And I'm 100% saying that I'm going to dangle certain things in front of you, not because I'm a good GM, but I'm a bit chaotic and I am probably partial. I have the spirit of the gremlin in me. And
Yes.
I mean, it's why my children are the way they are. But, oh, well, hopefully my wife isn't listening to this. Sorry, honey. Um,
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's a valid point though too. Is that not what, like, in some reflection as a game, is D&D? You know, obviously it's fantastical, but is not the whole point of role playing to in some facets mirror life choices within the notion of the game. So like
yeah,
if
for
you're
sure.
being a good GM and a good storyteller, that's part of storytelling. Is there's never going to be one option. It may feel like the reader or the person listening or the player may be like, oh well, this is the only pathway I can go until the next option's presented. And so like I feel like you always going to have that ability to play like the what if scenario.
Yeah.
Um, and way before it was popular. I mean, like I remember looking at what ifs. They used to have Star Wars books that you would what if the whole original trilogy. And so like you would
Ooh.
start with like the base story, but then you'd be like, well, what if Luke didn't go with Obi-Wan? He was like, no, screw you. And like then it's like, oh well, all of these other things would have happened. And oh well, what if Luke said yes to the Emperor and defeated Vader and turned to the dark side? Well, what would have happened? And so it's like the real, and I mean, this was in the 90s. Like, this is a precursor to all the what ifs that we get to see today. But so like you got to role play while you were reading those characters. And I feel like that's really what this is like. But you get to do it with yourself in the sense that you, I think if you're a good player who listens to the way that the GM tells the story, you're going to make choices that you yourself personally wouldn't, because it's what your character needs to do. And it's the direction that fits best with how you want to drive that character.
Hmm.
And it may seem uncomfortable or unnatural, but you have to almost kind of let go of your apprehension and follow that ability to say, oh well, that wasn't an opportunity that I had, but my character could do that. Well, let's see how that develops with this character. And so yeah, I think that's just a huge part of like good storytelling. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter what franchise it is. I mean, I think that just you have to have that. And if you're not presented with options, like, then what are you doing? Like, you're not
Yeah.
telling a story. You're not living the story. You're not role playing the story. You're just, like at that point, like pick up a dictionary and read that.
Yeah.
You're
Pick up
probably
a
as
book.
entertained.
You're probably gonna
Yeah,
you're probably better off picking up a book because
yeah,
and like or as a GM or a world builder, you're better off writing a book
yeah,
because like the story that I have planned out may not be the story that you all choose to tell. Um and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. I actually get more excited about the things that you all want to do. One, I'm lazy as hell. I don't want y'all to like if I don't have to write something to, like more than what I need to do, great.
yeah,
But with that, with like all kidding aside, no, actually, I want you to explore. I want you to interact and immerse yourself in the world. I want you to be fully vetted and invested in the world. And don't get me wrong, I've had amazing players who were like that. Um, and for, you know, good reasons, bad reasons, neutral reasons, just depending on your perspective, like, you know, sh- you know, things happen and we can't play anymore at the time. Unfortunately, life gets a certain way. But some of the best players that I've ever had the pleasure of running games for immersed themselves, became like solely immersed and were 100% like they were their character. And then outside the game, they would step out and they knew who, like, they knew who they were. They were
yeah,
this person, but they were that character. Like, And I'm very careful and cautious about role playing because, like, for the folks out there, like, I am someone who I can, I do okay with voices, I do okay with accents, but I can really lay on, like, I'm really analytical by nature. So when I have time with someone, I can kind of pinpoint, ooh, this is going to poke something.
Yep.
This is going to trigger something. And not in a bad way, but like in a weird, messed up, like, it just naturally comes. And I think Kyle, we had that experience in a session. And again, the disclaimers were out there. Hey,
Yeah,
we do this, we do that.
we
But like a really good thing that or not good thing, but I think something that I did as a GM, and Kyle, you can completely tell me if this was too much, but like Kyle's character Dorian is a Dampier, so like half vampire, like undead. So in the world that I run, like I'm as a disclaimer to everyone, I am pretty I am pretty realistic. Fantastical, but realistic. There are
that's
people who
fair.
are not going to
That's fair.
like certain people. Like the new DMG and the player's handbook and whatnot may, like, if your only experience of Dungeons and Dragons is the 2024 rule set, you may not like my game. And it's not because I'm a dickhead or I'm mean or I'm an asshole, whatever you want to call me. What it is that as a historian, it is in my nature I was classically trained to know that certain cultures did not jive with other cultures. You can call it whatever the word you want to call. So in my game, I implement that because that's what makes it realistic. You need realism in order to have immersion.
And
Now,
in my opinion, I find those kinds of games to be more intriguing because
it's
it's
also some
relatable.
it's relatable, but here's the thing. Here's the missing key that everyone forgets. When you have a game where there's a little bit of realism and a little bit, like, a little bit of whatever, again, let's call it negativity, right? You actually give the heroes an opportunity to be heroes, right? Like, not to go on a tangent, but an opportunity. So let's say, like, people don't like goblins for whatever reason. Okay. You can give the players the ability and opportunity to be heroes and to defend the goblins and say, no, these goblins are good beings. They're good people. Like, there's no reason to hate them. You can hate the actions of people, but not the people itself. And you can make an amazing, beautiful story told right then and there, right? I don't personally believe that goblins, orcs, whatever, are completely evil in my game. There's good, bad, and neutral. But from the perspective of a character, she was an elf. She did not like anything that was undead, that was considered undead, because in the lore, as an elf, she had witnessed a lot of the undead doing horrible things to her people. So she has a biasness. But then, like, at one point, Dorian, Kyle's character, had a bit of there was tension. And remember, Matt Colville talks about this, to bring tension and drama into the story and how to weave it. Well, there is a point of tension. Dorian goes, runs his mission, comes back, fulfills his promise, and shows that NPC that he's not what she thinks he is, right? And then that was growth for not only the character, but for the NPCs, and then more importantly, as players. So there's that type of nuance. But I mention all that because there are certain things and limits and whatnot. And Kyle, again, from your perspective, what did that make you feel? What was your thoughts through that?
Well, generally, I go off of, as everyone does, what happens as we're playing. Like I'm embodying Dorian
Yep.
playing through the motions of the scenario, and she had called me undead swine, which
Whoops.
that's
It
kind of a
being said
trigger
fighting
for
words.
sometimes. I mean,
it's
those
a
were
it's a trigger. It's a
that's
trigger.
exactly what it was meant to be. It was 100% meant to
And
be fighting words.
Yeah.
because for those of you that are, unfamiliar with what's going on in our game, which is fine. Uh, Dorian had a traumatic moment in his past where someone he cared about died because of him, and because he is undead swine, according to individuals. And it kind of brought things back because he hadn't thought about that whole like term in a very long time, and it just kind of the anger from Dorian just kind of like seeped out in a in a moment of like heated like passion, like because at the time we had two people in the Feywild in our group, didn't know how to get them back, and it's like I don't have any magic skills. We're asking someone for help, and I'm kind of worried about the others, and I'm I'm just trying to move this process along to get them back. And things led to things being said, and eventually we got them back, and all is well that ends well. But things happen.
True.
Uh, so
Well, and here's the thing, like from a character's perspective, because we've moved past that.
yeah,
What do you think your character feels? These are,
in
yeah,
in
sorry.
terms of in terms of what exactly? Like just in
In
general feelings?
in terms of like, how do you think your character's matured?
I mean, he's not a fan of being called it still, but
Sure.
I mean, he's gonna probably try and contain himself a little bit better.
Can I tell you what I see as a GM?
Sure.
I see a character who's developed into someone that would have snapped into then now someone who takes the word, takes those things words, doesn't like it, but says, I'm going to prove you different and I'm going to prove
Yeah.
you wrong. And there's a lot of maturity, which is character development, which is growth, right? So, like, folks, like, this is the reason why we get into this. This is why we ask these questions and why we kind of do these little reviews and whatnot. But more importantly, this is the epic part about storytelling, like the cool things you get to see. Now, with that being said, there's a lot of changes that have occurred in fifth edition, and there's a lot of things that in tabletop RPGs that have just changed in general. My question to the both of you, and I'm going to ask James this first, is like as a new player, what are some of the things that have helped you learn to play that you would recommend to someone listening to this who's never played?
So I mean, first and foremost, I think it would be if you're new to the game, I would say use the tools that you have available. So obviously, most people, have some form, shape, or way to access, the internet. They can go on to D&D Beyond. They can look into different whatever game version that you're playing, and kind of learn a little bit more about how the game operates. Some of the things I've enjoyed doing is sitting in on other games, whether it's the ones that Brian has run or listening to other people talk about character creation in games through YouTube and other means like that. And yeah, I mean, I realistically, I don't think I've besides like looking up what the character, traits are. I don't think I've looked at the rule book at all. I'm just kind of like, cool, we're gonna wing this thing, and I'm gonna let the experienced players, because I'm the least experienced in our group. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking, and all the rest of y'all have played, and so I'm like, yeah, like I'll just kind of go with the flow on that end. But that's partially personality, and that's you
Hmm.
know, I'm like, hey, I'm the rookie. I can learn from y'all and kind of let the proverbial dice fall where they may. And
I like the
so,
pun there. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
I got you. I got you. But I think a lot of it is finding what fits your learning styles or the ways that you like to, kind of intake content to experience the games. And that's part of immersion, and that's part of how you can immerse yourself in it is to really sit down and say, okay, hey, I really love watching. And actually, I probably my greatest or my best, besides Brian's games, for learning D&D and what this epic looks like with like role playing, has been watching the Critical Role animated series, because
Yeah.
there's a really fun way to get involved in it and to see this epic story, but not just watch people sit and talk, but actually have that lived out in a show. And that made me more intrigued. And so, I mean, you got to find that niche for how you like it, and I think that's really what it comes down to is the personal niche. For me, it's again, like I said, it's look up some YouTube videos on like the specific character type or traits, do a little bit of reading, not necessarily purely from a rule book, but from players' perspectives, and lean on your more experienced players. I think that's probably the best part. Is like, I mean, I've talked to Kyle a bunch at different points about character development and different things. Talked to Brian. I mean, poor guy probably doesn't want to answer any more of my questions about D&D, but he's going to have to because now he's stuck with me as a GM. So,
Never
like, yeah,
do.
I like, and that's what I think you have to be is whether you're comfortable with it or not, be inquisitive enough to push your boundaries to see what you can learn. And if you need the rule book and you want to go read fifth edition or whatever the heck the current number is, go ahead and do it if that's your style. But don't feel like you have to, because you can, I think, get comfortable enough to play and then just play and see what happens. I mean, like, that's, I think, a big part of it is you have to you have to jump in at some point. You can't just put your toes in the water. You got to go. You got to be a big boy and go down to the end of the pool and jump
Gotta
off the
get in
diving
the
board.
deep end. Gotta get in the
Yeah,
deep end.
fully jump in and cannonball that thing or belly flop, whatever you like to do, and see what goes on. And but yeah, I mean, like, I think that's the same for any game though, and that's where like I pulled a lot of my experiences with other games and how I've immersed myself in those. Like, oh, these are the things that worked for the other stuff. This is how I'm going to do it because this is how I know I can learn. And so it's you got to be a little self aware.
Okay. Kyle, I'll ask you the same question before we wrap up. What are some of the things that you have learned that you recommend or that you've experienced? Actually, that's a better way. What are some of the things that you've experienced that you would kind of show or tell or, talk to new players about so that they can learn what you have learned from from your experiences?
Well, the first thing I would say would be to don't be afraid to be creative. Like, if you want to play as a, a artificer who multi-classes into bard and makes a guitar that spins around like a rotary gun, because I've seen people make it. Seen people make it. Um, but yeah, if you want to play that kind of character, be my guest. Like that, the this game is all about creativity and having fun with your friends and the camaraderie of you know having an adventure together. And like, honestly, this has been like the best game to play for the past like 10 years in my opinion, since I started. And like, the first group I played with was great, but since playing with Brian and actually being able to create characters with backstories and actually work on their backstories, like that has honestly been one of the funnest things I've actually gotten to do.
Well, I appreciate that, man, because I'm a huge proponent of obviously of world building and of like I'm really like I want to know your character and how your character impacts the world and how your character does things. But in order to do that, you need to feel like you're part of the world. So,
Mhm.
like, have at it. Go do what you think you're do what you think is best for you, right?
Yeah.
And then I get to know the character, and I'll be honest, like I have to read over it several times because I'm the type of person that, like, if I read it three, four, 5 times, I know, oh, okay, this is what the character does. This is what the character doesn't do. Let me see this quirks. Let me do this. And like I'm a pretty loose liberal GM in that sense of like, oh, you want to have a feat, go for it. You want to have this magic item, go for it. That's fine because what I'll do is I'll take those things and incorporate it into the world in a way that's not because you asked me, it's because, oh, wait a minute, this character deserved it and went from there. But no, I
Hence
appreciate that,
why
man.
hence why I give you 30 million word
Yeah,
documents.
that is 100% true. And I will read all
I
of
am
them
notorious.
eventually. I will
Yeah.
read all of them eventually. But here's the thing, and for the folks listening, more importantly, start small, like join a Facebook group or a Discord group, join our Discord community. Shameless plug. And quite honestly, but in all seriousness, like find a group, get immersed, learn about the game, the world, because my style of GMing may not fit everyone. So you need to find a style, right? And your style of playing may not be suited for every game. So just find a way to find a group of people that are willing to teach you, right? Like there's a group of people within my a local Discord community that teaches people how to play Star Wars Legion on Mondays from 6 to 7:30, 6 to 8 o'clock. They teach people how to play Star Wars Legion. Find a group like that. Get to know the game. And very much like James said, he kind of dipped his toes in the water before he really started to say, okay, this is something I'll commit to. Because once you commit to a TTRPG, you're committed for a long time, whether it's several months, whether it's a year, 2 years of a campaign, you're going to commit. So you might as well enjoy it, right? And don't worry about the rules. The rules are there. They'll always be there. Someone's going to probably make a change to the rule and it's going to suck. Just get into this. If you enjoy the essence or the spirit of the hobby, then that's like if you enjoy 80% of that hobby, whether it's Star Wars Legion, but in this case, RPGs, like stick with it. Doesn't matter what rule set because you can always change the rule set. You can go if you want to just play in something that is Lord of the Rings centered, there's the One Ring. If you want to step away and play something like Cthulhu related, Call of Cthulhu, anything rules light, Monster of the Week, Savage Worlds, there's a bunch of them. So as long as you just enjoy the storytelling narrative hobby, right? That's what it's about. I know people like I can picture them in my mind's eye that they're not narrative people. They say that they're narrative people. Actually, two people I can think of. And they play Warhammer 40K, 30K, Middle Earth Battle Companies. They play a lot of the skirmish games. They're not narrative at all, right? They say that they are, and they come up with a little cutesy narrative. And I'm like, no, this is not a narrative. Like, this is like a scenario. Because I would like throw out, oh, like maybe the units are doing this, 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 and that. And I remember getting the look of like, yeah, maybe let's just roll our dice. Like it was the most awkward, dude. It was the most awkward
Oh
engagement.
dear Lord.
And I was like, yeah, I don't know if this is for me. Not the skirmish games, but even when I run a skirmish game, it's narrative. It's a scene. It's something. So if you enjoy that, and I think that's the biggest premise, is that if you enjoy like the narrative aspect, the storytelling aspect, then everything else is gravy. But with that being said, that is tonight's episode or today's episode or wherever you are in the world. That is the episode for today. So, with all that, we appreciate your support. We appreciate you listening. If you did enjoy it, be sure to share this with your friends and let them know the power of storytelling and, more importantly, the power of the bearded nerd. Just kidding. More importantly, the power of storytelling. We love you. We care for you. Be kind and compassionate to one another. Some crazy times out there, but being kind and compassionate actually goes a long way. Have a great one, y'all. And more importantly, keep gaming.